Exodus 33, verses 12 to 23. Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, 'Lead these people,' but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, 'I know you by name,' and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with me, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name." Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." And the Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But," he said, "you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." Then the Lord said, "There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." 9-year-old Joey was asked by his mother what he had learned in Sunday school. "Well, Mum," he said, "our teacher told us how God sent Moses behind enemy lines on a rescue mission to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. When he got to the Red Sea, he had his engineers build a pontoon bridge, and all the people walked across safely. Then he used his walkie-talkie to radio headquarters for reinforcements. They sent bombers to blow up the bridge, and all the Israelites were saved." "Now, Joey, is that really what your Sunday school teacher taught you?" his mother asked. "Well, no, Mum, but if I told you the way the teacher did, you'd never believe it." If you travel from here to Rotorua via Atiamuri, you will pass by Hatupatu's rock on the roadside. There is an ancient Maori legend about this rock, and I'll give you a very brief outline. Hatupatu was a youth who came here in the Arawa canoe. With his brothers, he went inland bird hunting. He scoured the bush, spearing many of the forest birds. In the depths of the woods near the Waikato River, he was caught by a frightful bird woman. She carried him off to her gloomy home, which was a cave near the top of a rocky mountain above the Waikato River. She had a kind of aviary of tame birds and little lizards. There she set Hatupatu, bidding him mind the birds while she was out hunting. Hatupatu awaited an opportunity to escape, and one day when Kura of the Claws was out in search of food, he fled from the cave dwelling after liberating the birds. One of these birds flew off in search of his mistress, crying and chirping as he went, "O Kura, Kuru, Hatupatu has gone." The witch giantess came back to her cave, and seeing that Hatupatu had let her pet birds go, and moreover killed all the pet lizards he could find, she set out in furious anger to recapture the fugitive. Hatupatu swiftly crossed mountains and valleys and streams, but the infuriated Kura took whole hills at a stride. She was close on Hatupatu's heels when in his desperation he came to a great round boulder lying at the foot of a ferny hill, and he immediately repeated the most potent Maori charm he could think of. It was a sort of a Maori open sesame. At this incantation, the huge rock split open, revealing a hollow at its heart. Hatupatu leaped in, and the rock closed after him. Kura was just a moment too late. She tore savagely at the boulder with her fearful claws, but Hatupatu was safe. The story continues, but I won't take it any further. I don't ascribe any spiritual significance to this story, but whenever I pass the spot, I'm reminded of the passage in Scripture which we have just read now. In the 33rd chapter of Exodus, we hear a dialogue between Moses and God. But first, let me catch you up on what has been going on in the previous chapters of Exodus. After bringing the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, God had initiated a special relationship with them. He had called Moses to be their leader. Through Moses, God had given them the 10 Commandments and instructions on building the tabernacle. God had promised to dwell in the midst of the Israelites, and the tabernacle was to be a visible presence or visible sign of that abiding presence. God would be present with the people in a real and material way as they travelled through the wilderness. The problem, of course, is that by the time we get to chapter 33, the people have stumbled badly. While Moses was up on the mountain talking to God, the people got restless and asked Moses' brother Aaron to create a golden calf for them to worship. If you remember the commandments, you know that this was forbidden. God had told them that they were not to worship any graven images, but only the one true God. So after the Israelites betrayed their relationship with God, God was angry and changed his mind about the form of the relationship. We read about Moses going into the tent of meeting and speaking with the Lord face to face as a man speaks to his friend. Moses had to veil his face when he went back to the people because they couldn't bear to see that reflected glory fading away. To my mind, this immediately raises a question. When we meet God, does it show? When we come away, is there any sign? I know our faces won't shine because we're no longer able to meet face to face. But do we show any sign of having been with God? Whether it is by our demeanour or by the way we deal with our fellows. I don't mean that we have to be a doormat to the rest of the world and let them trample over us, but neither do we need to indulge in overbearing behaviour or sharp business practice. The tent of meeting was outside the camp. It was in contrast to the tabernacle, which occupied a central location within the Israelite camp. It was a temporary structure where the people could inquire of the Lord until the more durable tabernacle was completed. When Moses went into the tent, a pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance, symbolizing God's communication with Moses. And whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they all stood and worshipped at the entrance of their own tent. Earlier in Exodus, we read of thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over Mount Sinai and a very loud trumpet blast. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. Everyone in the camp trembled. It was obvious that God had come down to talk with the people or to Moses directly. When God talks to us today, How does it show? In fact, does it show at all? If anyone going up High Street today sees the church covered in smoke, I'm sure they will reach another conclusion, and the sound of the trumpet will be replaced by the wail of a siren as the fire brigade approaches. However, we need to look to a time when people will say, hey, those guys are meeting with God in there. And this is not just something for the church leadership to work on. We all need to be working towards it and to show the fruit by the way we interact in the community. Moses had been up on the mountain with God and had received the tablets of stone with the 10 Commandments carved into them. On his return to the camp, he discovered that the people had become bored and asked Aaron to make them some golden gods to lead them in Moses' absence. Because of this sin, the relationship between God and the Israelites changed. God would still keep the covenant made with them at Sinai, but instead of going with them in the tabernacle, God would send an angel to be with them. God said, I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. Moses was not satisfied with this arrangement. He wanted to know for sure that God would be with him and his people. Moses believes that Israel's future survival and well-being depends on God's promise and presence. Moses must have certainty, and only God can tell him what he wants to know. Moses wants to know who God will send. And he says to God, you have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Moses continues to remind God that Israel belongs to God and that God cannot escape responsibility for these people. Moses always wants more from God, and he doesn't always listen very well. God has responded to Moses by saying in verse 14, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. As soon as God responds, Moses is at it again. If your presence will not go, do not carry us up from here. God again reassures Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. Moses believes that the only way others will know that the Israelites are God's special people is if God accompanied them. Then Moses asks for one more thing. Show me your glory. According to Walter Brueggemann, glory is something like an overpowering light, a shrouded magisterial presence. From time to time, I use an arc welder to carry out farm repairs. The electrical arc creates intense heat to fuse metal surfaces together, but it also creates intense light. If you look at the light without a protective mask, it's extremely uncomfortable. Prolonged exposure causes arc eye. I've only once had arc eye, and hopefully never again. So when Moses asked to see God's glory, God refuses. God says that Moses has been given God's name and all of God's goodness and mercy, which refers to the material blessings of creation. Yet God is not going to let Moses see his face. Now this can be confusing Because in earlier chapters we are told that Moses and God are face to face in the tent. Presumably this is further evidence that the relationship between God and man has now changed. A full discovery of the glory of God would overwhelm even Moses. What God will allow instead is for Moses to stand on a rock, and when God's glory passes by, God will put Moses in a cleft of the rock, cover him with his hand, and then later take the hand away so that Moses can see God's back. In a sense, Moses' prayer was finally answered on the Mount of Transfiguration, where he shared a vision, however brief, of the Lord's glory with Elijah and 3 of Jesus' disciples. For us, the same applies. A full discovery of the glory of God would be more than we could stand. The nearest we can receive is the merciful display we see in Jesus Christ. That is the most that we can bear at this stage in our spiritual maturity. God's goodness is in his glory, and he will have us know him by the glory of his mercy rather than by the glory of his majesty. Moses was to be placed in the cleft of the rock, which was deemed to be a fit place for him to gain a retrospective view of the goodness and glory of God. The rock in Sinai could be seen as symbolic of Christ the rock of refuge and salvation, and our place of safety, or cleft in the rock, can be seen as Christ on Calvary. Jesus Christ, beaten and bruised, crucified and killed in our place. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul says, "And now I will show you the most excellent way." And in verse 12, he talks of the very heart of our future, face to face. Now we see but a poor reflection in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. You'll sometimes see children having staring competitions with their parents. You probably remember doing it yourselves when you were little, trying to stare the other one out. We all know that the staring competition is just a front. We all know what the child really wants and what the parent wants. It's face to face. It's closeness, transparency, openness, adoration, intimacy, face to face. In Exodus 33, we read about Moses going into the tent of meeting and speaking with the Lord face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. As I've already said, Moses had to veil his face when he went back to the people because they couldn't bear to see that reflected glory fading away. One day, it won't just be for Moses. One day, it'll be for all of us. It won't be just for an hour, and it will never fade away. Face to face with the Lord Jesus Christ. Everything good you've ever experienced now has been, in the words of verse 12, a poor reflection as in a mirror. The old King James Version translated it, "Now we see through a glass darkly." Anything good now is a poor reflection of face to face. Every kiss you've ever wanted, every affirmation you've ever craved, every relationship you've ever pursued, every longing you've ever felt will be fulfilled when you're face to face with Jesus. The one who loved you enough to walk into that furnace for you. The one who bled and died for you. He's waiting in heaven for you. And if you've received him now, he will say to you then, "It's so good to see you. I have loved you for so long. Let me get a good look at you, face to face." The only reason I'm preaching this morning is because we're not face to face yet. At the end of the day, that is the only reason to preach. It's the only reason to exercise any of our gifts, because at their best, these gifts give but a poor reflection. At times, they help us see through a glass darkly, and we say to each other, perfection is coming, maturity is coming, and face to face is coming. That's what Paul was talking about when he said, "But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. And perfection comes with face to face." There is one thing we can do now that utterly defines the glory of then. That one thing is love. And now these three remain. Everything else passes away, but these are the three things that remain into eternity: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. The life to come is a world of love. We've seen the future, and the future is love. Well, friends, live it now. If you're not a Christian, receive Jesus today. Go from being a person who does not have love to a person who has love. Receive Jesus into your life. He loves you. He will live his life of love in you and through you. An unbelievable future is yours for the asking. Ask him in, and he will take you in. Come and talk to someone afterwards if you want to know more. If you are a Christian, look at him again today. Communion is a little torchlight pointing us to the person of love and the future of love. His body given for you, his blood poured out for you in love. And it's a little token of the feast we will have when we are face to face. Be nourished by this, and then just love. Love is what lasts. Love is what counts. I'm not deriding the use of spiritual gifts, but use them to show love and not because you can.